So welcome to the video or the lesson on chapter 3. So chapter 3 we're going to do in one day. And so hopefully you've had a chance to do the pre-reading questions on chapter 3. The pre-reading questions are there to get you more familiar with some of the vocabulary, a couple of the concepts of the chapter, and also how you could maybe potentially connect to the topic before you go through the videos or come to class. So just to reinforce, those pre-reading questions are due before you watch this video. And then you can reinforce your learning with the video. Okay, so chapter 3 is on the compounds of the cell. We're building up our understanding. We're still going to be talking about chemistry, but we're going to build up on what we did last day with elements and compounds and talking about the subatomic particles and bonding and then ultimately water, and keep going up in this hierarchy so that we're going to continue to talk about more and more complex things. And so now we're going to talk still about compounds, but this time some larger compounds, sometimes called macromolecules. So it is an introduction to organic compounds, because anything organic in chemistry, the specific scientific use of that word, would mean carbon based. And so life's molecular diversity, it says down here, everything that we can see in the world is based on, that's alive in the world, sorry, is based on the properties of carbon. And just as a bit of a throwback to last day, I have the periodic table here again. And I fall asleep during a lot of science fiction movies. Actually, I fall asleep through a lot of movies because I just don't stay up very well late at night. But if we take a look at carbon and silicon here, last time we were talking about valence electrons and the number of valence electrons and chemical properties. And if we can see here, if we're a carbon-based life form, sometimes in movies, they speculate maybe in outer space that there is a silicon-based life form. And the thing that I want to draw your attention to is that they are in the same column here. And why they're in the same column here is they have the same number of valence electrons. And we're going to talk about carbon and why that's important. So just a little bit of a throwback to that periodic table. Again, you're not tested on that, but that is something that's interesting to note about the organization of the periodic table. Those two elements would have the same number of valence electrons, which, as we're going to see, is pretty important with organic chemistry. So organic chemistry, I usually make some kind of a bad joke about how my car only burns organic fuel because it is a carbon-based fuel source. So diesel, gasoline are hydrocarbons, and they do have carbon at their central core of their molecule. And so organic chemistry, what we're talking about that is carbon-based compounds. And that's why we are an organic life form, because we're based on carbon. So all the diversity in the molecules in the cell that makes up you are made up primarily of carbon bonded to other elements. And organic molecules or organic compounds are carbon-based. We know with carbon, it has 4 valence electrons. So I'm just going to draw a quick little sketch of carbon. So that would be the nucleus of carbon with the 6 protons and however many neutrons in that isotope of carbon. And then it would also have 6 electrons to place. So 2 in the first shell and then 4 more in that outer shell. So that gives it 4 valence electrons. It ultimately then has 4 different bonding locations where it could accept or share electrons. So we've got these 4 directions for carbon to branch in, and it can branch in all 4 ways that way. So it's going to be a sharing of electrons, so that means it's a covalent bond. And that's important to keep in mind as we move forward and talk about organic molecules. So I'm going to, in class, try and demonstrate to you with a little molecule building kit. I'm going to do my best in the video to try and draw you some pictures and help make up some of the understanding of organic chemistry. So we're going to start out with this idea of carbon having 4 possible bonding sites. So I'm going to flip to the next slide. And what I'm going to do is talk up or try and explain the molecular structure of methane. So that's carbon with 4 hydrogens bonded to it. So methane is the name of it, and it has the chemical formula CH4, so meaning it has 4 hydrogens and 1 carbon. So we have a central carbon in the middle, and if I were to show you my molecule building site, carbon is illustrated with this black ball, and it has 4 possible sites that it can bond with things. Now, when we draw these out, we kind of go with this as the formula, or more of a structural idea. So illustrated in the center here is carbon with the 4 lines coming straight out of it. Now there is a 3-dimensional shape to this. There is molecular geometry, which is really hard to take off the page as you're reading this, or even just looking at the slides. And so hopefully with a demo in class, I can illustrate that a little bit better. So we do have this ball and stick model that's possible to build, and it does take up shape. So the 4 single bonds of carbon point to the corners of a tetrahedron. It does make this 3-dimensional shape, if you will. So that's methane, and we'll practice building that in class. And we can up the structure of things too. So if I said try using models to build a 2-carbon hydrocarbon, so I could draw that. We'd have 2, I'll draw it down here, so we'd have 2 carbons. And remembering that each carbon has 4 possible bonding sites, we'd have it looking like that. So from this, it gives me a bit of a worksheet to see what it looks like and what the chemical formula would be. So a 2-carbon hydrocarbon would be C2H6. And this gets the name ethane. Okay, so a 3-carbon hydrocarbon, I'm going to draw it over here. It's technically called propane. If you get to build this or see me build it, it kind of looks like almost like a balloon animal or stick animal poodle, if you will. So I always call it the propane poodles, but really in a boring way. We've got the 3 carbons all together. And then all of the hydrogens rounding out and filling the bonding sites. And again, all these carbons have 4 possible bonding sites. So that would give me the chemical formula. It would be C3H, how many is that? 8. That's the chemical formula for propane. And like I said, it does kind of look like a poodle because it looks, I'm going to try and draw it for us. Those would be the 3 carbons. They don't actually go in a straight chain. And then if you can imagine, those would be all the little hydrogens that come off of it. Does it look like a poodle? Here we go. I'm even drawing a picture. And so that has 4 bonding sites, again, coming out of all of the carbons. And really, like I said, it's hard to imagine this straight chain carbon, the way we draw it out in the structural formula, having a 3-dimensional shape. But the 3-dimensional shape is critical in the properties of these molecules, or any molecule. So we could do this the same. We could have a 3-carbon molecule with a double bond. So double bonds exist. And if I were to draw that out, I'm going to switch colors and move up on the page a little bit here so you can see it. So we'd have 3 carbons still in a row. And it says this time we want a double bond between 2 of the carbons. So we'd put 2 bonds. And if we can remember how many bonding sites were possible for carbon, there's only 4. Just because there's a double bond here doesn't mean we get more bonding sites. So this end carbon could only bond with 2 hydrogens. This central carbon, if we take a look, it already has 3 lines sticking out of it. So it only gets to bond with 1 hydrogen. And this carbon at the end has 1 bonding site taken up, but still has 3 available to bond with hydrogen. So this central idea that carbon has 4 bonding sites is really a critical bit. And carbon can bond with itself, as in the case with a double bond, or hydrogen in the case of these hydrocarbons, or as we're going to see, any of those other really common elements. So if you remember there's CH, O, and N, those elements are going to figure prominently in our discussions of these biological or organic molecules. Okay, so hopefully this page doesn't look as scary. I've kind of worked it up. And so these are all hydrocarbons, and they're hydrocarbons because they're just hydrogen and carbon. And we're going to complicate things, but this one does illustrate some of the things that we've already talked about. So ethane and propane, remember this was the poodle one. Butane, so you might have a butane lighter that has 4 carbons. And by the time we get to 4 carbons, this is the first time that we can actually have alternate versions of the same formula. So we'd have C4H, counting quickly, 10, right, in both of these. But they do have different structures. And so butane and isobutane, because they have those different structures, actually have different points of flammability, like different temperatures that they actually will ignite, and other chemical properties. And so structure really is everything when it comes to chemicals and molecules that make us up. So when we add a double bond, it does change the end part. So butene, and that sort of thing. Again, this is kind of a little bit beyond where we need to go. Really, I just wanted to make it so it wasn't quite so intimidating to see these kinds of pictures. The other one is a benzene, and oftentimes people try and build this when I give them the molecule building set. So benzene is a really common structure in organic molecules, and it's got these 6 carbons in a row, and then there's an alternation of these double bonds. And on any of these, you can always check that carbon always has and only has 4 bonding sites that are filled up by other bonding with other atoms. Okay, so if we were to leave it there, great. But the problem with hydrocarbons is that there is no greedy oxygen. If we think back to the kind of bonding and solubility, we would have a serious problem. We know that gasoline or oils don't mix in water. And again, the reason that they don't is that they're not like water. So water is polar, and hydrocarbons are non-polar. Remember, we're dealing with carbon and we're dealing with covalent bonding, but the problem here is that these don't mix together. So we can't have things in our body that are not soluble in water. So the key thing to that, the way that our molecules are organic molecules based on carbon but are soluble in water, are good old functional groups. And functional groups are little add-ons. So if we were to talk about functional groups, the key thing to this is that it makes them molecules soluble in water, or hydrophilic, water loving. So overall, we've got organic compounds having all of these properties, the size and the shape of the molecule, and the functional group that is attached to it. So first off, functional groups make them soluble, which is really important. And also these differences in size and shape brings different properties again. All right, so moving on to the functional groups, and these ones look a little scary. I'm going to draw your attention to just a few that we're going to see again, and hopefully in that way sort of prioritize some of these ones to make some sense of these. So this image is out of your textbook. I'm just going to make it a bit smaller so that it fits all on my screen here. Oops, there we go. And so some important functional groups, they really do come up again. So the first one that we're going to talk about is a hydroxyl group, sometimes called an alcohol. So anytime you see the OH attached to something, we had seen it earlier as a hydroxide ion. You can remember that from bases, right? When it's free floating, something is basic, but we have talked about it as it's an ion, right? And now it's not an ion, but it's actually an attachment. So it's bonded to a carbon. So if we have an organic molecule with an OH attached to it, that means that this is what would make it soluble in water, because that greedy oxygen is in there making this molecule polar. And that is why alcohol dissolves in water. So hydroxide or hydroxyl groups are important. Then next two are kind of linked together. And so we're going to talk a lot about amino acids. And so amino acids have two of these functional groups, one on each end of the molecule. Starting out with the name, amino acids, aptly named, have an amino group. So amino groups have the carbon bonded to a nitrogen and then two hydrogens. This is the first time and the only time really in our work that nitrogen is going to show up. So the amino group is important because it's one end of an amino acids, and amino acids make up all the proteins in you. So the other side, or the other part of that word, said acid. So the other group that's on an amino acid is a carboxyl group. And a carboxyl group is a carbon bonded to a hydroxide and then also double bonded to an oxygen. So carboxyl groups, when they're attached, they make things a carboxylic acid. So as you remember, I'm talking about these two together because they make up amino acids. And amino acids are what make up proteins, which, as we're going to see, proteins are your default answer in this course. If you are not sure, go with proteins. If you wake up in the middle of class and I call on someone, proteins, always going to go for it. Okay, so phosphate groups, we're going to have a lot of phosphates when we talk about ATP, adenosine triphosphate, if you've ever heard of that before. And phosphate groups are really complicated. In our books, they always get illustrated as yellow circles with a P in them. So you can take a look at this phosphate groups and how they're all made up structurally, but we're going to simplify that. I'm going to switch my color here into phosphates are just going to be like that. So that would be three phosphates all linked together, which is what this is trying to illustrate. So phosphates are important, and we are going to talk more about phosphates. And this methyl group is interesting, but it's not going to come up too much. It was attached just to that image from your textbooks. Okay, so hopefully that's not too intimidating. Those are the key groups that I'll try and draw your attention to as we build our knowledge on these macromolecules or organic compounds as we study them. I've said a few times here that structure is everything in order for things to have chemical properties, whether we're talking at the elemental level, the compound level, right? These functional groups, again, we're going with structure, and they lead to different functions. So this is just an example. This is an example of a sex hormone in lions. I'm not an expert in sex hormones of lions, but it did give me a chance to just illustrate this idea that difference in chemical groups or structure, whoops, still yellow, does lead to very different functions. And so if we were to compare these two, there's a lot of elements that are the same, right? They do have these ringed type structures here that are mostly all the same. They have a hydroxyl group and a methyl group attached to them. The only way that they're different is an extra methyl group here and these two being different. So in addition, we also have a couple extra double bonds in this one, but overall, like at a first look, they don't look that much different, but they obviously, when you look at the organisms, there is a great difference in those. So that's really what I wanted to draw your attention to there. So these are the 4 classes of biological molecules. We're going to come back and talk about them in detail in the second video after the break in class and in the second part, because I didn't think you could watch through too long a video. These are sometimes called macromolecules because they're really, really big. They are all organic compounds because they are based on carbon in their structure. The other thing that talking about these classes, 3 of them are polymers. And so polymers, what polymers are really long molecules made up of sort of a repeating element or identical building blocks. I often talk about them as a string or a link of beads or Legos or whatever. That would be a quick illustration of a polymer. So polymers are made up of monomers. So each individual bead in my chain here would be called a monomer. And so I said that there are 4 classes of biological molecules and 3 of them are polymers. So carbohydrates are polymers, proteins are polymers, and nucleic acids are polymers. Lipids are not polymers, but they do have an element that does have a repeating chain. And so we can transfer what we're about to talk about here generally to all 4 of these macromolecules. So in the idea that now we know what a monomer is, what is something that is absolutely amazing in biology is that the monomers used to make polymers are universal, which means that the monomers in protein are the same in you as they are in your dog, as they are in an elephant, as they are in a tree. So the monomers made to make nucleic acids and genetic material are the same in you and fruit flies and the flower outside your window, which is absolutely amazing. So the monomers are the building blocks, or the beads used to make polymers. So when we talk about, I just had a notification come up on my screen that scared me. So the amino acid is the proteins of bananas. It's the same as the protein in you or in your dog. Proteins are made up of only 20 different amino acids. So this universality and also a limited number. We have a lot of words in the English language, and they're all based on 26 letters, right? We have fewer letters when it comes to amino acids to make all the different proteins. In your pre-reading, you might have written about how many different functions proteins have, and it is amazing. And remember, proteins is our default answer. We're going to talk so much about proteins because they're responsible for so many things in biology. So another example here is the monomers in your DNA are the same as in you as a banana. And if you thought 20 was amazing, there's only 4 different kinds of beads or 4 different monomers that make up all the genetic coding. So it's only like there's 4 letters in the alphabet to make all of the differences that we see in human life or biological life. So diversity of polymers would be a result of the arrangement and the variation in the sequence of monomers. Same as when we're talking about making different words, if you will. So before we get into the specific macromolecules, we're going to talk about the process of monomers becoming polymers. And so I like to think of this in terms of sort of beads linking together. So if you can imagine children's beads, or I'm going to draw another picture here. Imagine Lego, if you will. So this is my picture of a block of Lego, and it is a 4x4 little block of Lego, and it's going to link to another block of Lego. So the other block of Lego would have a place for these little nubbins to go in, right? And so we're talking about linking from one thing to 2 or shorter to longer polymers. So I'm going to draw another piece of Lego here. I've never done this drawing it with Legos, so yeah, just forgive me if I'm losing you. So we've got our 2 pieces of Lego, or this idea that we have these beads coming together. So if we want to link this shorter polymer, or even just this one polymer with another, or one monomer with another monomer, we have to have them come together. And all of, or a lot of the monomers that we're talking about have this OH. Do you remember that's a hydroxyl group sticking out of it? It was a common attachment in our functional groups. And so a lot of our monomers actually have a location with a hydroxyl sticking out of them. A lot of the other, because they are carbon-based and hydrogen is one of those big 4 elements, have a hydrogen sticking out of them. So this OH is akin to the nubs, if you will, on the Lego block, and the H is akin to like the holes in the bottom of the Lego that it's going to click into. So for these to click together, we have to get rid of the H and the OH, right? Those are in the way of the bonding sites. So those have to come out of the picture. Well, H, and O is H2O. That's water. So in order for these to get out of the way and these to come together, that's what we call making of a polymer or polymerization. Or if we think of it as water coming out, when you dehydrate your apples, right? Water comes out of them. And so that would be dehydration. And just to make it confusing, biology comes up with other names. So synthesis is making something. So we're making a polymer, or condensation. And when you think about this, of the 4 different words, condensation is when water comes out of the atmosphere and condenses on like your cold drink at the end of the day, right? So all of these have this commonality of water coming out. I like synthesis because I'm making something. I really like the word polymerization because to me it's quite descriptive. And then you have these other 2 words being linked to the idea of water coming out. So dehydration and condensation. And hopefully in this goofy drawing and my explanation of Lego blocks here, that's going to make some sense. I'm going to pause shortly in the video here just so you can clarify this and I can do a little demo in class. And I'd like you to think on which is your favorite of these 4 words and why. All right, so we're going to go the other way now. So the other way would be breaking things down. So we're going from a big molecule or a long polymer to maybe monomers or shorter, smaller molecules down here. So if this is the full molecule, right, and we want to break it up right there, same as, you know, in reverse, like last time, we have to stop up those bonding sites with something. And the easiest thing that we can do is kind of literally the reverse of what we just saw. And we take a water molecule to break up. So we get another hydroxyl group and a hydrogen group, taking the place of those missing bonds now. So it's not going carbon to carbon anymore. We've got the pieces of water being a hydroxyl group and a hydrogen group now blocking those bonding sites in our organic molecules. And so this is called depolymerization, right? Or it often gets the word hydrolysis. So hydro for water and lysis for breaking down. And if we think about it, that's aptly named. When we understand that water is being broken down into the hydroxyl group and the hydrogen group in order for this long chain polymer to become a shorter chain polymer and a monomer, or just 2 shorter chain polymers. So we'll take another break right now and make sure that you understand this one, and you can decide your favorite between depolymerization and hydrolysis. It's really worth, and I'm going to just say this now, and then we'll take a break. This is the end of the first half of the videos. It's worth taking a look at some of these videos that I list. So this one is listed on the Moodle site, but there's others in addition to the Crash Course series that are maybe more current than the Crash Course series and are also really useful. So there's a lot of information in the second half of this PowerPoint, and I'd encourage you to, check out all your other resources, maybe before you come to class or after you come to class, or before you watch the second part of this video.